The road stretched out before me, a black ribbon under the oppressive weight of the East Texas night. The pines stood like silent sentinels, their branches heavy with Spanish moss that swayed like ghostly fingers in the wind. My headlights, the only defiance against the encroaching darkness, cut a narrow swathe through the gloom, revealing the endless asphalt and the occasional flash of reflective road signs. I was driving the old Highway 59, a road that had seen its share of stories, most of them whispered in hushed tones around crackling campfires. I'd heard them myself, growing up in the small town of Hemphill, tales of the phantom hitchhiker, a spectral figure who appeared on lonely stretches of the highway, always on rainy nights, always with the same desperate plea: need a ride, Marshall. The details varied with each telling. Sometimes it was a young woman in a white dress, her hair plastered to her face by the rain. Other times, it was an older man, his face gaunt and pale, his eyes burning with an otherworldly intensity. But the plea was always the same, and the ending was always shrouded in mystery and dread. I'd always dismissed them as just stories, campfire tales meant to spook restless teenagers. But tonight, the rain was coming down in sheets, the wind howled like a banshee, and the darkness pressed in on me, thick and suffocating. Tonight, the stories felt less like fiction and more like a warning. The rhythmic thump-thump of the windshield wipers was the only sound in the oppressive silence of my truck cab. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white, trying to ignore the prickling sensation at the back of my neck. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. Then, in the glare of my headlights, I saw him. A figure stood on the side of the road, his back to me, his thumb outstretched. He was tall and slender, his clothes dark and soaked through by the rain. He didn't turn as I approached, didn't acknowledge the sound of my engine. He just stood there, a solitary figure in the heart of the storm. My heart leaped into my throat. I knew I should keep driving. I knew the stories. But something, a morbid curiosity, a foolish sense of bravado, made me slow down. I couldn't make out any details. His face was hidden in the shadows, but there was an air of profound sadness about him, a palpable sense of loss that tugged at my soul. I pulled over a few feet past him, my truck idling in the downpour. I hesitated for a moment, my hand hovering over the gear shift. The rational part of my brain screamed at me to drive away, to not get involved. But the rest of me, the part that loved a good ghost story, the part that was drawn to the mystery, won out. "Hey!" I called out, my voice barely audible over the roar of the rain. "You need a ride?" The figure turned slowly, and my blood ran cold. His face was pale, almost translucent, his features sharp and gaunt. His eyes, though, were what truly terrified me. They were black, bottomless pits, filled with an ancient sorrow, a grief that seemed to stretch back centuries. They weren't the eyes of a living man. "Marshall," he croaked, his voice a dry, rasping whisper that seemed to come from the depths of the grave. "I need a ride to Marshall." I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry. I couldn't speak, couldn't even nod. I just stared at him, mesmerized by the sheer wrongness of him. He was a ghost, a phantom, a creature of the night, and he was standing beside my truck, asking for a ride. He took a step towards the truck, and I flinched, instinctively recoiling. He didn't seem to notice. He reached for the passenger door, his hand passing through the metal as if it weren't there. My mind finally snapped back to reality. I threw the truck into gear and slammed my foot on the accelerator. The tires spun on the wet asphalt, spraying a torrent of water behind me. I didn't look back. I didn't dare. I drove like a madman, the rain blurring my vision, the wind screaming in my ears. I didn't stop until I reached the outskirts of Nacogdoches, the lights of the town a welcome beacon in the darkness. I pulled into a gas station, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the steering wheel. I sat there for a long time, the engine running, the warmth of the heater slowly thawing my frozen limbs. I tried to convince myself that I'd imagined it, that the rain and the darkness had played tricks on my eyes. But I knew the truth. I had seen him. I had seen the phantom hitchhiker of East Texas. The gas station attendant, a grizzled old man with a weary face, came out to my truck. He took one look at me, and his eyes narrowed. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, his voice low and gravelly. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to tell him the story. I told him about the hitchhiker, about his pale face and his black eyes, about the feeling of dread that had washed over me. The old man listened in silence, his expression unchanging. When I finished, he nodded slowly, a grim look on his face. "Them stories ain't just stories," he said. "That hitchhiker, he's been seen on this road for years. Some say he was killed in a car wreck back in the 30s. They say he's still trying to get home to Marshall. But his hand went through the door." I stammered. "He was a ghost." The old man shrugged. "A ghost, a demon, something in between. Whatever he is, he ain't human, and he ain't friendly. You did the right thing by driving away." He paused, then looked at me with a strange intensity. "But be careful, son. He don't like to be ignored. Some folks say if you see him and don't give him a ride, he'll follow you. He'll haunt you until you do." I didn't want to believe him. I wanted to dismiss it as more small-town superstition. But the look on his face, the sincerity in his voice, told me he wasn't lying. And the memory of those black, empty eyes was enough to send a shiver down my spine. I paid for my gas and drove away, my eyes constantly scanning the rearview mirror. I didn't see anything, but the feeling of being watched, of being followed, persisted. It was a cold, clammy feeling, like a hand on the back of my neck. The rest of the drive was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden menace. Every sound made me jump. I didn't relax until I was safely home. The doors locked, the lights on. But even then, I knew it wasn't over. The old man's words echoed in my mind. He don't like to be ignored. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that the phantom hitchhiker of East Texas was still out there, waiting, watching, and wanting a ride. A week passed, and I tried to put the incident behind me. I told myself it was just a bad dream, a product of stress and fatigue. But the nightmare started. Every night, I dreamed of the hitchhiker. He stood on the side of the road, his back to me, his thumb outstretched. But in my dreams, he would turn his head slowly, his black eyes boring into mine. And then he would start to walk towards me, his gait jerky and unnatural, his hand outstretched, reaching for me. I would wake up screaming, my heart pounding, the sheets soaked with sweat. I started to dread going to sleep, knowing that the nightmare would be waiting for me. Then the accident started. Small things at first. My car wouldn't start. I missed an important meeting. I spilled coffee on my new shirt. But they grew more frequent, more sinister. I found a dead bird on my doorstep. My phone kept ringing, but there was no one on the other end. I started hearing whispers in the dark. My name carried on the wind. I knew it was him, the hitchhiker. He was following me, just like the old man had said. He was haunting me. I tried to ignore it, to pretend that everything was normal. But the accidents, the nightmares, the feeling of being watched were taking their toll. I was losing my mind. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to go back to Highway 59, to the spot where I had seen him. I didn't know what I was going to do, but I knew I had to do something. I had to confront him. I drove out the highway late one night, the rain falling again, the wind howling through the trees. The familiar stretch of road stretched out before me, dark and menacing. As I approached the spot where I had seen him, my heart began to pound. I slowed the truck, my headlights sweeping across the side of the road. He was there, standing in the same spot, his back to me, his thumb outstretched. He looked exactly as I remembered him. The same dark clothes, the same tall, slender figure. I pulled over, my hand shaking. I took a deep breath and got out of the truck. The rain lashed at my face. The wind whipped around me. I walked towards him, my footsteps echoing on the empty highway. He didn't turn. "Why are you doing this?" I yelled, my voice cracking with fear and desperation. "What do you want from me?" He turned slowly, and I braced myself at the sight of those black, empty eyes. But this time, his face was different. It was still pale, still gaunt, but it was human. Sad loss, but human. And his eyes, They weren't black anymore. They were a deep, mournful blue, filled with an unbearable sorrow. "I just want to go home," he whispered, his voice a low, heartbreaking moan. "I've been trying to get home for so long." "Where's home?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Marshall," he said. "Just Marshall." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I saw not a monster, but a lost soul, trapped between worlds, yearning for peace. And in that moment, my fear vanished, replaced by a profound sense of pity. "Get in," I said, opening the passenger door of my truck. "I'll take you home." He looked at me for a long moment, his blue eyes searching mine. Then, slowly, he got into the truck. I drove toward Marshall, the rain still falling, the wind still howling. But the feeling of dread was gone, replaced by a strange sense of calm. The hitchhiker sat beside me, silent and still. As we approached the outskirts of Marshall, he spoke for the first time since getting into the truck. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. You've helped me." I glanced at him. He was smiling, a faint, ethereal smile, but it was a smile nonetheless. We reached the town square, a small, deserted park in the center of Marshall. He pointed to a spot beneath an old oak tree. "Here," he said, This is where I need to be." I pulled over, and he got out of the truck. He stood for a moment, looking at the tree, his face filled with a deep, ineffable longing. Then he turned to me, his blue eyes shining with a soft, otherworldly light. "Goodbye," he said, "and thank you." And then he was gone. He simply vanished, fading away into the night, leaving me alone in the rain. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty space where he had been. I didn't know what had happened, but I knew that I had helped him find peace. And in doing so, I had found my own. The nightmare stopped. The accident ceased. The feeling of being watched was gone. The phantom hitchhiker of East Texas was no longer haunting me. I still drive that stretch of Highway 59, sometimes. And on rainy nights, when the wind is howling and the darkness is pressing in, I still think of him. I think of his pale face, his mournful blue eyes, and his desperate plea for a ride home. And I know that the stories are true. The phantom hitchhiker of East Texas is real. But he's not a monster. He's just a lost soul, searching for peace. And sometimes, all it takes is a little kindness to help him find it.